All right, guys. We're doing today something a little different. It's gonna be more of a fun kind of workout. You could call it a push, but really we're doing a little bit of shoulders, one pushing exercise, so one shoulder press, and then we'll do some lateral raises. But we're also gonna do some arms today too. Reason being, normally I do 2 chest sessions per week, but sometimes every now and then, I don't really track necessarily, but every few weeks, 2, maybe 3 weeks, I like to sprinkle in more of like an accessory day where I'm focusing more so on just isolation exercises. I'll still do a couple compound movements, but for the most part, we're just focusing primarily on our mid delts and biceps and triceps today. It was a little more of a fun day. I did 2 warm-up sets here. So I've already started with the 2 warm-up sets on the shoulder press. We're gonna do 3 working sets here. So this is gonna be working set number 1. I'm gonna do the set first, like always, and then I'll explain to you as the sets progress. I'll start to explain what I'm thinking about and what I want you guys to kind of think about when you're performing this movement. So working set number 1. Okay. So not quite to failure on that, because I still want to kind of pyramid up in weight. Now, I don't know if I actually touched on why I like to sprinkle in the odd arm day or shoulder focused arm day into my routine. Is a few reasons. One, it just allows me to focus a little bit more on those areas that I might neglect throughout the program. So if I'm doing 6 days a week, push, pull, legs, I'm typically going to do push, pull, or push, legs, pull is how I structure it. So push, legs, pull, push, legs, pull. And sometimes, depending on my goals, like right now I'm trying to focus a bit more on my back and chest, so I'm doing a bit higher volume for those. I might neglect or push my arms and sometimes my mid delts down to kind of like a maintenance level of volume. So throwing this in, it just allows me to kind of focus on those particular muscle groups, but also mainly I find psychological benefit from it. Usually after a few weeks, 3-4 weeks of pushing hard through your split or your program, whatever one you're doing, sometimes it's nice psychologically to have a little bit of a break, or a day or 2, or even a week rather, but for this case, just a day where you can just kind of have fun, focus on more isolation, accessory type movements, and not have to go so crazy or balls to the wall. Now, that being said, I know I am doing the shoulder press still, but I don't mind doing this as opposed to doing so much compoundy chest movements on top of this and then some triceps. So shoulders and arms today. I know that was a little bit of a long-winded explanation, but I'm just kind of giving you some insight on why I'm choosing to do that. Now I'm using this Prime Fitness machine. I love these ones. I've showed you these in the past. The great thing is it's got these different pegs on them that allow you to kind of adjust the resistance profile. So if I wanted to target more of the lengthened range or the bottom beginning range, I would place those weights primarily on the top. And then if I wanted to target more of that end range, I could place some weight at the bottom peg. Obviously the middle one is going to be your mid range. Now today I'm only going to be doing the mid range. The reason being is because this is the beginning of the workout, I'm more fresh. I have more strength right now, obviously, because I haven't been, exhausted yet through the workout. So that way I'm more efficiently going to be able to overload the muscle. And it's just better for hypertrophy. So training in that sort of mid-range is always great because it actually matches what you're capable of and what your muscle is strong with. So sorry, that sounds weird, but I've explained this before, but our muscles tend to be stronger through that mid-range, weaker through the extremes. So I'm starting with the mid-range. I'm going to stick to this today because it's going to allow me to overload the muscle more efficiently. So set number 2. Oh man. Sometimes I might sound jittery or come across jittery on camera because one, I'm out of breath and I just did a set, so talking adds to that, but pre-workout is starting to kind of kick in conveniently right when I'm trying to explain things. So it's like you get this kind of like jittery feeling of having to get what I need to say out. But so that being said, what I'm thinking about in this movement, I'm sliding my hips forward intentionally, so I'm actually leaning back on this pad. Now the reason that is because this machine moves on an arc, the path of this machine, if I were to sit up straight, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I find it very restrictive and I don't necessarily have the mobility fully. I mean, I do, but I find it restrictive in that end range because this moves on an arc. I'm now having to tuck everything back like this. One, that's uncomfortable on my shoulder for me. It may not be for you, but then because it moves even further past my head, the end range is now going to be right around here. So to me, that feels very restrictive and uncomfortable. So if anything, I slide my hips a little bit forward. Now, some of you might be like, well, you're going to be working a bit more chest that way. I am correct, but I'm okay with that. Sliding forward, I will still target a little bit of upper pecs, but I'm still really targeting those front delts. And then that also allows me to not have to be so kicked back or flared back like this. I can now bring those elbows forward, which is what I want, because whenever I'm using any machine, I always want these joints to be stacked and in the direction that the machine is moving in. In other words, I don't want to be fighting against the machine with my elbows flared, pushing in this way, but the movement's actually going that way. So I want to keep these tucked. That allows me to work within that proper path of the machine and not have any sort of weird forces going on my shoulders that might cause discomfort. So I'm leaning back, keeping these elbows tucked under. And then as I initiate every rep, one thing I'm thinking about and that I want you to think about is don't just think about pressing up, but rather think about pulling your biceps or your elbows in towards your ears. Same thing like I teach on the chest. When you're pressing, you're thinking about bringing your biceps or this upper part of your arm in towards your pecs or in towards your chin or clavicle, depending on if you're doing incline or flat. But with this, for shoulders, it's the same thing. I want you thinking about, instead of just pressing straight up, I want you actually thinking about pulling, I'll show you with this arm, pulling or pushing this upper part of your arm in towards your ears, squeezing these front delts. Same thing applies when you're doing dumbbells. So that's just one cue I want you guys to think about when you're performing this movement. So for this last set, we are going to go heavy, or heavier rather. Rep range, this one's going to absolute failure, including partial reps. The first two, I kind of stopped 1 to 2 reps shy of failure, which is still equally effective. So I just feel like doing that. I want to go all the way to failure, as heavy as I can. All right, so I'm sliding that butt forward, leaning back into the seat. I'm using a slightly wider than shoulder width grip, and I'm going to pull these elbows forward and front. As I initiate that rep, that first rep, I'm thinking about driving my bicep and elbows in towards my ears. Okay. We're gonna do a drop set. Nail your shin on those weight posts. Okay. All right. So same thing as I always do. Let my heart rate come down a bit for that drop set. I don't care about the go, go, go factor of it. Quality reps is what I'm looking for. And most importantly, quality control. One thing I want you guys to think about is working within your active range. So when you're coming down, what happens is if the seat is set too high, oftentimes it's really hard to, one, get into this machine because you have to kind of internally rotate to get your hands in. And if you don't think about pulling elbows forward, then you're starting this rep with that internal rotation. But another factor, like I said, is staying in that active range. So you're out of your active range here. So if you're coming all the way down and you notice your elbow starts to drift behind you like this, that's usually a clear indication that you're working outside of your active range. Is that inherently wrong? Not necessarily right away, but I do believe over time that's going to cause discomfort and potential injury if you don't correct that, because at that point you're no longer really active in that range. You're moving your shoulder in a position that it can't really go. But more importantly, the weight is what's actually pushing that into that position. So you're not really controlling it at that point. So it becomes passive range, which I've already explained in a leg video that I already posted. But it's just something to think about. Make sure that that elbow is kicked under your wrist and in the direction of the actual path of the machine the entire time. The minute you see it start to drift or feel it drifting back, you're probably going too low, or you need to slide forward a little bit more just to ensure that you're working in that active range. So, little food for thought. We're gonna move on now. We're gonna do, I don't know, we'll see what's open. All right. So we're doing some standing single arm bicep curls with the dumbbells. Now, I did one kind of warm up set just to kind of warm everything up because I'm still kind of fresh in this workout. I've only done shoulder press, so now I'm warming up the biceps a bit, warming up those elbows, and then also supersetting it with some standing dumbbell lateral raises. Now for the bicep curls, I'm using this preacher bench here, and I'm actually just leaning into it, using it as a brace for my arm. This is gonna allow me to keep my shoulder and my arm stable through the entire movement, so I'm not swinging the weight. I can focus on driving that tricep into that pad to initiate the movement, and then just think about bringing my forearm to my bicep. Now in the warm-up, I did both arms because it was super light, but for the actual working sets now, I'm gonna be doing single arm, where I'm gonna be leaning over the one side, making sure that this upper part of my arm is perpendicular with the ground. The reason that is if I do double arm, most people or some people kind of have their arms flared. Now I can tuck these in, but like I've mentioned before, it's pretty restrictive for me and it just adds a bit of elbow discomfort. So leaning over the one side allows me to ensure that this upper part of my arm or my bicep is in line with that line of force, which is gravity. And then all I'm thinking about is just pulling that bicep, or sorry, pulling that forearm to my bicep. Now, sorry, the wrist straps too. I'm not using these really for the bicep curls, but I am using them for the lateral raises. And again, I'm using them strictly because I just don't want my grip to become a limiting factor as I increase that weight and as the sets progress. So it just helps. And if you haven't tried it, I encourage you to try it because it does make a world of a difference. I can just tighten these up and I don't have to worry about actually gripping so much. I can just focus on raising out in a way and focusing primarily on that mid delt. But it's enough talking. We're gonna do this now. Okay. Ow. Now, another benefit of leaning over the one side is it allows you to get your legs and hips out of the way so you can actually clear the weight. So you don't actually have to worry about having that weight sort of bump your leg or thigh in the movement at all. Okay. We're gonna use the same weight. We're gonna do some lateral raises. So, as you may notice, I'm leaning forward. Now, the reason I'm leaning forward is two main reasons. One, it places my traps in a bit of an unfavorable position. I know I'm never going to be able to eliminate my traps because they do help with that elevation, but by leaning forward, it just places those mid and upper traps in a little bit of an unfavorable position, but it also lets my mid delt become in more of a favorable position. Now, what I mean by that is if I were to just stand up straight and I just do side laterals coming straight out beside me, I'm still going to be working that mid delt, but I'm also going to be working a lot more front delt. However, if I do that pinkies up trick where I internally rotate, now I'm placing that mid delt on top of my shoulder, so I'm going to be targeting that mid delt more now than my front delt. However, I find that very uncomfortable. There's a lot of discomfort, especially on my right side, by internally rotating the shoulder and raising it up. So instead, if I just raise my arms up without internally rotating, but now I lean forward, so instead of manipulating my shoulder position, I'm manipulating my torso angle, which is going to allow me to place this mid delt in a more favorable position because now I'm placing that mid delt on top of my shoulder. So I know and I can ensure that it's in the direction of that line of force, which again is gravity. So it's just straight down. So I'm just aligning that mid delt with that line of force. That's kind of my thought process and why I tend to lean forward. And then lastly, I'm not raising directly out beside me. Some people can if they find that works, or they don't have any discomfort. But for me, again, I just find it very irritating on my shoulder. It hurts. So I raise more slightly out in front, which is kind of what's called the scapular plane. And it's just healthier for most people's shoulders, in the long run especially. So a little food for thought. It's kind of how I'm going about executing this movement. All right, we're gonna do another set. But I'm gonna take a little longer rest this time. Just slightly longer. Talking and explaining, it's tiring. Tires me out immediately after the set, but I just wanna make sure that, you know, I'm getting across the things that I find helpful and the things that work for me, and things that I picked up and learned along the way. So I hope that, you know, you appreciate that. I mean, if you don't have to watch it. You can skip through it. Oh, man. Oh. Got one more set. I think we'll go a little bit heavier. Maybe like 10 more pounds probably for the bicep curls, but for the lateral raises, I mean, we'll try it. I'll try 50, push for like 8 reps. Oh, come on. Gross ass hair. Oh man. Okay. Now laterals for that last set. See? 8 reps. Now, when you are progressively overloading on this in terms of weight, and you're going heavier, I'm okay with a little bit of body English and movement, but just don't swing the entire set. Don't swing your whole body to thrust that weight up. Try to control the weight as much as possible. So I'm going to do the same. You might notice a little bit of swinging, a tiny bit of momentum, but for the most part, I'm trying to maintain a rigid posture. But more importantly, like I mentioned over there, I'm on the shoulder press, I'm trying to control the weight. So the quality and the control of every rep. But obviously, yeah, you're going to move regardless based off of physics when you're doing heavy weight. I'm aware of that. But just be conscientious of that. Oh, that is heavy. That's all right. I think for that, I'm gonna do a drop set, not 10 pounds. I'm gonna go down by like maybe half. I'll do 25. And then this is where I'm really gonna focus primarily on keeping everything super rigid and just trying to focus primarily on those mid delts to fully burn them out. Oh, no, do 5 more. Okay. So when you're performing these, I really want you guys thinking about not just lifting up, don't just think about up, but rather think about out and away. So you're trying to reach out in this kind of like sweeping motion out, almost like you're trying to reach out and touch the corners of the room that you're in, or the corners of the wall that's in front of you. So you're not thinking up, because if you think up, you're more likely going to do this, where you're initiating that first rep with your traps. So you're kind of doing this like shrug to kind of get that weight up like this, because you're just thinking up. So instead of up, think about out. I'm pushing my hands out and I'm trying to push them away from me. So again, just a little cue for you guys to, think about when you're executing this movement. again, all these cues, these aren't groundbreaking, but to me, over time, when I learned how to properly move through the movements, I loved it because I got these kind of like aha moments where I was like, oh shit, I never thought of it like that. So I hope me teaching kind of the things that I've learned over time inspires you and kind of gets that same reaction or emotional reaction to kind of be like, oh shit, you know, I never really thought of that movement like that. I always just thought up as opposed to out. And now when I think out, I feel it so much more in my mid delt. So hopefully it helps. Okay, we're gonna move on. All right, so what I'm doing here, one, we're gonna be doing a JM press on the Smith machine. So I'll show you that. It's kind of like if you were to take a skull crusher and a close grip bench press and combine them together, that's gonna give you the result of a JM press. So I'll run through the form, but first, I mean, you guys might already know this, but to set up the bench, to make sure that it's centered, instead of eyeballing it and getting underneath it, feeling it out, just set up the bench, bring this bar all the way down until the knurling, this gap from the smooth part to the knurling on each side is even. So plain and simple, I could just move this over, shift it a little bit, maybe a little bit back, put my hand in, make sure that it's roughly even on each side. There we go. So now I know that it's centered, and then all I have to do is just adjust the depth that I want to sit at underneath that bar to make sure that the bar path is in line with, is the proper bar path, sorry, to match my arm path of the actual exercise. So where that's going to be located is going to be different for each of us. The reason that is because we all have different limb lengths. So some people's forearms or arms in general might be longer. So it's going to dictate whatever is your limb length, and that's going to be sort of whatever's comfortable to you. So one thing I want you to think about is this bar, as you lay underneath it, I want you to bring it down somewhere around chin and somewhere around upper pec or clavicle region. Somewhere in here is going to be your bar path. So that's going to feel the most comfortable, but more importantly, it's going to allow you to keep this line from your shoulder to your elbow elevated. You want to make sure that your elbow is slightly elevated above that line. So keep it elevated above your shoulder line. So I'll explain it when I'm setting it up right now. As I come down, I'm going to bring this bar down. Now I'm going to do kind of like a skull crusher and a close grip. So I'm going to hold roughly shoulder width apart, keeping elbows somewhat tucked. I'm not keeping them tucked in like this though. I'm allowing them to be naturally flared out and whatever's comfortable. And then I'm just going to lay underneath this and make sure that I can elevate these shoulders up. So I'm not dropping shoulders down like this, keeping them slightly elevated above my shoulder line. And this is going to be my bar path right here. So whatever that is, roughly maybe Adam's apple or just slightly below it. But again, yours is going to be different. Take these off. We don't need them anymore. Now this is a compound tricep movement. Primarily we're working the triceps, but you'll still work the shoulders a bit. So that's why I'm choosing them and selecting them on today's workout, because it's a shoulder and arm day. I'm still going to work a bit of shoulders with this movement, but it's primarily going to be loading my triceps as well. Ah. Okay. A little bit heavier. So again, we're gonna do 3 sets. I am counting that as a working set, just not quite to failure. I stopped a few reps, shy of failure on that one. I'm not gonna go crazy on these. I'll probably just hang around that 1, maybe 2 reps shy of failure. Reason being is it can be a bit of an awkward movement, and even more so, it can be a bit of an awkward movement to fail on. Now I know I'm using a Smith, so I can easily lock it. I'm not going to necessarily get pinned, but especially if you're not used to it, for the sake of this video, I'm not going to go to failure. But if you're not used to this movement, don't push it too hard. Start really light and just work in that range, because a lot of people can get elbow discomfort from this movement. However, I do think this is beneficial for your elbows. I'm a firm believer that training in these ranges that you're not used to, that may be uncomfortable, is actually beneficial long term, because your body's going to be able to adapt to those extremes and to those ranges to allow that pain to sort of subside, because now you're strengthening this tissue, tendons, ligaments, things like that all around this area that normally you don't get or load by doing other movements. So I highly recommend trying this. It might be discomfort or uncomfortable, sorry, but start light, super light, even if it's just the bar, and just slowly work into that range. You don't have to go too deep either. I'm not bringing it all the way down to my neck. My main focus is I'm keeping my elbow above my shoulder line and just coming down, almost compressing that joint, and then driving through. And I'll explain some more cues on this next set. Okay. Next set. For this final set, one cue I want you thinking about when you're performing this movement is, instead of just thinking about down, I want you to think about this joint, your elbow joint, and I want you to think about pushing that elbow away from you. And then as you extend and contract that tricep, you're pulling that elbow, in towards you, squeezing that tricep. So elbows away, coming down, and then pulling elbows in, squeezing. That's it. You're just thinking about those elbows moving back and forth like that. And I find that helps, because it helps position your arm and keep it elevated above your shoulder the entire time, as opposed to thinking about down and then you're dropping everything down like this. Okay, let's do it. Last set. So again, pushing elbows away from me, getting that stretch, pulling elbows in towards my face, squeezing those triceps. Woo. Okay. Oh man, that's it. Okay, we're gonna move on. Just got 2 more exercises, 4 more sets. We're gonna do a cable bicep curl, face away cable bicep curl, so behind your back, curling in to get that length on that bicep. And then we'll finish off with just a cable cross tricep extension. I want you to adjust these pulleys up all the way at the bottom. Now, when you're doing a face away cable curl or a Bayesian cable curl, if you want to do both arms at the same time, you're gonna need a narrower pulley system. Either one of those dual pulleys that are just on the rails, or the free motion one like this one, like this Nautilus one, where you can actually move the arms up and down and bring them in, because you want them to be narrow. If you use just your traditional cable stack, the wide ones, like those big units, it's gonna be too wide, and you're gonna be holding out like this and curling in. You'd have to stand so far in front that by then it just wouldn't even be worth it. So If you don't have one of these, that's fine. You could do single arm and you just use any pulley, set it up all the way at the bottom, and you just want your arm to be comfortably behind you. So in other words, I don't want to be taking too far of a step in front like this, where that cable is now pulling my arm, and there's going to be a lot of stress and pressure on this front delt. So just enough that my arm is just slightly behind my torso. That's going to put enough stretch on the bicep anyways. Because after all, that is the main goal of this movement, is we want to work the bicep, train it in that lengthened, stretched state the entire time. So I'm keeping elbows behind me the entire time. I'm not curling in like that, but I'll show you a little bit more as we progress through the sets. So again, that was just kind of like a little gauge set. This is actually going to be the working set because we're only doing 2. And again, I just do that gauge set just to make sure that it's set up properly and it feels good. Okay. All right. Kind of the last set. I lied. We are going to do a drop set. I did go heavier. Now, for my setup, what I want you thinking about, I want you to have a split stance. This is going to allow you to be more stable in the movement. If you stand with feet together, as you curl and that weight transfers higher up on you, it's going to start to pull you back. So split stance is just going to keep you more stable in the movement. Ideally, you can even do these seated on a bench, but for the sake of this video, split stance, keep yourself stable, chest up the entire time. I'm not rounding and curling in like this with my torso, keeping that chest up high. And then all I'm thinking about is pulling my forearm to my bicep, keeping those elbows behind me. So again, I'm not letting my elbows drift forward like this, keeping those elbows behind me the entire time. And I'm almost just compressing that elbow joint by thinking about bringing that forearm to my bicep. Oh my God, I'm burning out. It's good though. Do one more drop. Again, when I'm dropping these weights, obviously I am keeping track of how much weight I'm doing for the future, but in this moment, I'm dropping them to kind of how I feel. So each set is almost like gauging, okay, I'm gonna drop it X amount because I'm probably only gonna get this many reps with that particular weight. So it's not like I have a set number that I'm trying to just drop by 10 pounds. It can vary depending on the set. Because my target rep range is gonna be roughly 8 to 10. Okay, we got one more exercise. Now we're gonna do a cable cross tricep extension just to kind of finish everything off. Again, 2 sets. Probably the last set's gonna be a drop set. Now the same thing applies. You want to use a more narrow cable stack when you're doing standing cable cross tricep extensions, because similar to how I taught on the rear delt flies, you want to come up forward, have your arms at your side, and have it so these cables, or these, sorry, the cable, yeah, is in line with that arm angle that you have. So you don't want your arms to be too out like this. So this would be too far. So I got to bring these cables in slightly. Make sure that one was already in. Now, if you don't have one of these cable stacks, that's fine. You can just do single arm. Okay, that's pretty much going to be it. So now I'm going to stand slightly back, not too far back, because I don't want to work. The further back I stand, the more of that end range I'm going to be working, with a shortened range. Because again, remember, whenever this cable is around 90 degrees with your arm, that's going to be the peak resistance. So I'm going to stand not directly up at it here, because then I'm primarily only working that beginning lengthened range. So I'm going to stand just a little bit back to work that more mid range. So right around here is going to be peak resistance. So I'm going to be able to overload the triceps a little more efficiently. Keeping elbows locked in position the entire time. I'm not moving them around in space. Keeping them locked, keeping that shoulder stable. And just thinking about driving that forearm and my hand down, but back behind me. A little heavier. So we're going heavier on this last set. Again, because I want to do just a little drop set like I did for the biceps. All right, a bit out of breath. Now, when I'm performing this movement, what I'm thinking about, and this might sound a little corny, but I like to visualize how muscles are working when I'm executing movements. So I'm not also like, sorry, let me articulate this. I'm not only thinking about the joint, keeping everything stable in this upper arm, and just thinking about extending that forearm and hand down and back behind me, but I'm also thinking about and visualizing the tricep, and I'm thinking about almost and envisioning it, pulling it up my arm. So as I'm extending, I'm picturing that tricep moving up my arm, shortening and squeezing, almost like I'm trying to bring this point down here of the tricep in this lengthened position, and then this point up here as close together as possible. So I'm trying to bring these points as close together as possible while I'm performing that movement. So again, might be a little corny for some, but it's just another cue or another thing to think about and visualize when you're performing and executing these movements. So again, pulling that tricep up my arm, squeezing. Okay. A little drop. Again, as many reps as we can get. I don't really care. right, guys, that's it for today's shoulder and arm workout. I know it was a bit different, but hopefully it was more fun for you guys to kind of see the things that I do for my shoulders and for arms, and hope you guys learn some new tools that you can kind of add to your arsenal of your own workouts. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. If you made it this far in the video, I really appreciate it. And as always, keep working hard, continue to work diligently, and take it easy. I'll see you on the next video. Hopefully, you know, we'll do something different. Maybe, I don't know, probably some legs or some sort. But anyways, keep working hard.